Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks into what he thinks is a friendly interview, only to find himself trapped in a verbal ambush that would make his Twilight co-stars cringe? What you're about to witness is the moment Robert Pattinson's legendary composure finally cracked on live television. And trust me, you've never seen anything quite like this before. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets wilder with every single word that comes out of these two mouths. The atmosphere in the View studio that morning felt different. There was an electric tension in the air that even the seasoned production crew couldn't shake off. Robert Pattinson sat in the guest chair, his usual calm demeanor intact as he adjusted his jacket. He had come prepared to discuss his latest film project, a psychological thriller that had been generating serious Oscar buzz. What he hadn't prepared for was Joy Behar's agenda. "So Robert," Joy began, her voice carrying that familiar tone that regular viewers knew meant trouble was brewing. "I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me for weeks now." Robert tilted his head slightly, maintaining his polite smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Well," Joy continued, leaning forward in her chair with the predatory grace of someone who had cornered their prey, "I've been reading about your latest film, and I have to say, I'm concerned about the message it's sending to young people, especially young women who still see you as that vampire heartthrob." The other co-hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't part of the pre-interview discussion. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly sensing where this was headed. "I'm sorry, what message are you referring to exactly?" Robert asked, his British accent carrying just a hint of confusion mixed with growing wariness. Joy's eyes lit up with the kind of gleam that comes right before someone drops a bombshell they've been saving. The message that it's okay for men to manipulate and gaslight women, which seems to be exactly what your character does throughout the entire film. And honestly, given your past with playing a controlling vampire boyfriend, I find it deeply troubling that you keep choosing these problematic roles. The studio fell silent, except for the quiet hum of cameras still rolling. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "Joy, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Have you actually seen the film?" "I've seen enough," Joy shot back, waving her hand dismissively. "I've read the reviews. I've talked to people who have seen it. And frankly, I don't need to sit through 2 hours of watching a woman get psychologically tortured to know that it's not something we should be celebrating." "But that's exactly the point of the film," Robert replied, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "It's meant to expose those behaviors, not celebrate them. The character I play is clearly the antagonist. The entire narrative is built around showing how damaging that kind of manipulation can be." Joy scoffed, and the sound echoed through the studio like a challenge being thrown down. "Oh, please, Robert. You can dress it up with all the fancy film school talk you want. But at the end of the day, you're still profiting off the exploitation of women's trauma. And the fact that you can't see that is part of the problem." The camera caught the exact moment when something shifted in Robert's expression. His polite mask didn't slip, but there was a new intensity burning behind his eyes. "Joy, I respect your right to have an opinion about films you choose not to watch, but I find it incredibly irresponsible for someone with your platform to make such sweeping judgments based on second-hand information." "Irresponsible?" Joy's voice rose an octave, and she leaned back in her chair with theatrical indignation. "I'll tell you what's irresponsible, Robert. What's irresponsible is a grown man who built his career playing a stalker vampire, now taking roles where he gets to psychologically torment women for entertainment. What's irresponsible is pretending that's somehow artistic, when really, it's just the same misogynistic garbage wrapped up in indie film pretension." The other co-hosts looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. Sarah Haynes opened her mouth as if to interject, but Robert was already responding. His voice still controlled, but with an unmistakable edge of steel. "That's an interesting perspective, Joy. Especially coming from someone who has spent decades making a living off of tearing down other people on national television. If we're talking about exploitation and profiting off controversy, I think your own career might be worth examining. The studio gasped. Joy's mouth fell open, but Robert wasn't finished. You know what I find truly irresponsible? A talk show host who ambushes guests with personal attacks disguised as social commentary. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, but it's clear you had no intention of having an actual conversation. You just wanted to grandstand and create a moment for your highlight reel. Joy recovered quickly, her voice dripping with condescension. Oh. So now, I'm the bad guy for asking tough questions? This is exactly what I'm talking about, Robert. The minute someone challenges you, you turn it around and make yourself the victim. It's classic manipulation. And frankly, it's proving my point. Perfectly. Your point? Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your point seems to be that you can say whatever you want about someone's work and character without doing even the most basic research. And then when they defend themselves, you claim they're being manipulative. That's not journalism, Joy. That's just bullying, with better lighting. The tension in the studio was now so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every camera was focused on the two combatants, capturing every micro-expression and verbal parry. The other co-hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this train wreck continue to unfold. Joy's face was flushed now, her voice rising to match her growing anger. Bullying? You want to talk about bullying? You've made millions of dollars playing characters who intimidate and control women, and now you're sitting here trying to intimidate me for calling you out on it. The only difference is, I'm not some helpless character in one of your movies. I'm not going to be silenced by your pretty boy charm and your victim complex. Victim complex? Robert's composure was hanging by a thread now. Joy. You've spent the last 10 minutes attacking my character, my career choices, and my personal integrity based on a film you admit you haven't even watched. You've accused me of promoting violence against women, of being manipulative, and of exploiting trauma for profit. And when I try to correct your mischaracterizations, you accuse me of playing the victim. Do you see the irony here? The only thing I see, Joy snapped back, is a privileged actor who's upset that someone finally had the courage to call him out on his garbage. You can sit there in your expensive suit and use all the big words you want, but at the end of the day, you're just another Hollywood pretty boy who thinks he's above criticism. That last comment hit something deep, and everyone in the studio could see it. Robert's hands, which had been casually resting on the arm of his chair, slowly clenched into fists. His jaw worked silently for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Above criticism? Robert repeated, each word measured and deliberate. Joy, I've been sitting here for 15 minutes listening to you criticize everything from my career choices to my moral character. I've responded to every accusation with facts and explanations. I've tried to engage with your concerns in good faith, even though it became clear within the first minute that you had no interest in an actual discussion. So please, enlighten me. How exactly am I acting like I'm above criticism? Joy waved her hand dismissively, clearly emboldened by what she perceived as Robert's growing frustration. Oh. Spare me the wounded artist routine. Robert. You're sitting there, acting like I'm attacking you personally, when all I'm doing is pointing out that your career choices have consequences. You can't just hide behind artistic integrity when people call you out for glorifying toxic masculinity. Glorifying toxic masculinity? Robert's voice rose for the first time, and the change in volume made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. Joy. Have you listened to a single word I've said? The film explicitly condemns the behavior you're accusing me of promoting. The character is the villain. He's punished. The entire story is about a woman finding the strength to escape his manipulation. But you wouldn't know that because you chose to form your opinion based on gossip and headlines rather than actually engaging with the work you're so eager to condemn. I don't need to watch propaganda to know what it is. Joy shot back, her voice getting shriller with each exchange. And frankly, I'm tired of men like you lecturing women about what we should and shouldn't be offended by. You don't get to decide whether your work is harmful to women. We do. Men like me? Robert's voice was ice cold now, and everyone could see the storm building behind his eyes. What exactly does that mean, Joy? What kind of man am I, in your expert opinion? Joy leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. You're the kind of man who thinks he can charm his way out of accountability. You're the kind of man who gets defensive and hostile the moment a woman challenges you. You're the kind of man who profits off stories about women being hurt and then acts surprised when women have a problem with it. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at Joy for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the force of a sledgehammer. You want to know what kind of man I am, Joy? I'm the kind of man who spent 6 months working with domestic violence counselors to make sure my performance was accurate and respectful. I'm the kind of man who insisted that part of the film's profits go to organizations that help abuse survivors. I'm the kind of man who has used his platform to speak out against the very behaviors you're accusing me of promoting. But you wouldn't know any of that because you're too busy building straw men to tear down on national television. Joy's face reddened, but she pressed on. Oh, how convenient. Now suddenly, you're a champion for women's rights. Where was all this noble activism when you were playing Edward Cullen, teaching teenage girls that stalking was romantic? That did it. Robert shot to his feet so quickly that his chair rolled backward, and the sudden movement caused a collective intake of breath throughout the studio. His hands were shaking with barely contained rage as he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. How dare you? The words came out as a growl, and every person in that studio could feel the fury radiating off him. How dare you sit there and reduce my entire career to some twisted narrative you've constructed in your head? I was 19 years old when I was cast in Twilight. I was a teenager taking the biggest role of my life, and I've spent the 15 years since then trying to use whatever influence that role gave me to do meaningful work. I've chosen projects specifically because they challenge harmful stereotypes and tell stories that matter. But none of that fits your narrative, does it, Joy? Joy tried to interrupt, but Robert's voice rose to overpower hers, his British accent becoming more pronounced as his anger peaked. No, you don't get to talk now. You've spent 20 minutes talking. It's my turn. The other co-hosts sat frozen, unable to look away from the verbal carnage unfolding before them. You want to lecture me about accountability? Let's talk about accountability, Joy. You've built a career on manufacturing outrage and tearing people down for sport. You've made a living off of creating controversy where none existed, and now you're sitting here trying to destroy someone's reputation based on willful ignorance and malicious assumptions. I am not trying to destroy anyone, Joy protested, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Really? Robert's laugh was bitter and sharp. Then what would you call this? You ambushed me with false accusations, attacked my character, dismissed my explanations without consideration, and when I tried to defend myself, you accused me of being manipulative and hostile. If this isn't character assassination, then what is it? Joy's face had gone from red to pale, but she wasn't backing down. It's called holding celebrities accountable for their choices. You're not a victim here, Robert. Accountable for what? Robert's voice was reaching a fever pitch now, and cameras captured every second of his controlled demolition of Joy's arguments. For making a film that you refuse to see? For taking roles that challenge audiences? For trying to use my platform responsibly? What exactly am I being held accountable for, Joy? Other than being successful enough to warrant your attention. You're being held accountable for perpetuating harmful narratives about women, Joy said. But even she seemed to realize how weak the argument sounded at this point. Robert slammed his hand down on the table beside his chair, the sharp crack echoing through the silent studio. What narratives, Joy? You keep saying I'm perpetuating harmful narratives, but you can't name a single one because you haven't done your homework. You're just repeating buzzwords and hoping they stick. The cameras zoomed in on both faces now, capturing Joy's growing discomfort and Robert's barely controlled fury. The other co-hosts looked like they were watching a car accident in slow motion, unable to look away but powerless to stop it. "I don't have to justify my concerns to you," Joy said, her voice defensive now rather than attacking. "No, you don't." Robert agreed, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone again. "But you do have a responsibility to your audience, to base those concerns on facts rather than fiction. You have a responsibility to the people whose careers you attack to at least understand what you're attacking. And you have a responsibility to yourself to be better than this petty, vindictive performance you've put on today." Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly struggling to find a response that wouldn't make things worse for her. But Robert wasn't finished. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy," Robert continued, his voice now carrying a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward. "The real tragedy is that you had an opportunity today to have a meaningful conversation about representation in media, about the responsibility artists have to their audiences, about the complex relationship between entertainment and social issues. Instead, you chose to turn it into a circus act designed to humiliate your guest and generate clips for social media." Joy finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "I was trying to have that conversation. You're the one who got defensive and started attacking me personally." Robert's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, every word was precision engineered to cut deep. "I got defensive? Joy, you opened this segment by accusing me of promoting violence against women. You called my work misogynistic garbage. You suggested that my career choices make me complicit in harming women. You questioned my moral character, my integrity, and my motivations, all while admitting that you haven't even bothered to see the work you're condemning. And when I tried to explain the actual content and context of my film, you dismissed every word out of my mouth as manipulation and victim playing. If that's your idea of constructive conversation, then I think we have very different definitions of dialogue." Whoopi Goldberg finally found the courage to speak up, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should take a breath here, and—" "No." Robert cut her off, his gaze never leaving Joy's face. "We're not taking a breath. We're going to finish this conversation because Joy clearly has more to say. Don't you, Joy? You've been building up to something this entire time. You didn't bring me here to talk about my film. You brought me here to make a point. So, make it." Joy's face was a mask of barely controlled anger and embarrassment. "Fine. You want me to make my point? Here it is. You've spent your entire career playing men who hurt women, and now you're trying to convince us that it's art. You've made millions of dollars off the fantasy of male dominance and female submission, and when someone calls you out on it, you throw a tantrum like a spoiled child." The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras humming. Robert stood perfectly still for a moment, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "There it is, the real Joy Behar, ladies and gentlemen. When the facts don't support your narrative, you resort to personal insults. When your arguments fall apart, you attack the person instead of addressing the issues. And when someone refuses to be bullied into submission, you call them a spoiled child." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I have made millions of dollars in my career. And I've used that money to support causes I believe in, to help people who need it, and to make films that challenge audiences to think differently about the world. What have you done with your platform, besides tear people down and create division?" Joy's face went white. "How dare you question my contributions? I've been fighting for women's rights longer than you've been alive. Have you?" Robert's voice was like a scalpel now. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been fighting for your own relevance by attacking anyone who threatens to overshadow you. You've built a career on manufacturing outrage and exploiting controversy. And when that well runs dry, you create new controversies out of thin air. That's not true, Joy stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Robert pressed on relentlessly. Tell me, Joy, when was the last time you used this platform to actually help someone instead of tearing them down? When was the last time you brought a guest on here to celebrate their work instead of ambushing them with gotcha questions? When was the last time you focused on building something positive instead of destroying something that threatens your narrative? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The other co-hosts stared at their colleague in horror as she visibly struggled to find any defense for her behavior. Robert leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to just above a whisper but still carrying clearly through the studio. You want to talk about toxic behavior, Joy? Look in the mirror. You want to talk about people who hurt others for entertainment? You've turned character assassination into an art form. You want to talk about accountability? Take some responsibility for the damage you do to people's lives and careers with your reckless accusations and willful ignorance. I don't have to sit here and listen to this, Joy said, starting to rise from her chair. Actually, you do, Robert said, his voice stopping her mid-motion. You started this fight, Joy. You brought me here under false pretenses. You attacked my character and my work without doing your research. And you've spent the last 30 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on national television. The least you can do is sit there and listen to the consequences of your actions. Joy sank back into her chair, looking smaller than anyone had ever seen her on television. Robert straightened up, adjusting his jacket with deliberate calm. You know what the most pathetic part of this whole performance has been, Joy? It's that you could have been better. You could have asked thoughtful questions about the film. You could have engaged with the actual themes and content. You could have had a meaningful discussion about representation and responsibility in entertainment. Instead, you chose to take the cheap shot, to go for the easy headline, to prioritize your own ego over genuine discourse. He paused, letting his words hang in the air like a death sentence. I came here today, prepared to discuss my work honestly and openly. I came here ready to engage with difficult questions and challenging perspectives. What I found instead was a host more interested in performing for her audience than actually engaging with her guest. That's not journalism, Joy. That's not activism. That's just cruelty disguised as righteousness. The camera captured the exact moment when Joy's composure finally cracked completely. Her face crumpled, not with sadness, but with the recognition that she had been utterly and completely defeated in front of millions of viewers. Robert took a step back from the table, his voice returning to its normal volume but maintaining that steely edge. I think we're done here. Joy, I genuinely hope you take some time to reflect on what happened here today. Not for my sake, but for the sake of every future guest who sits in this chair, trusting that they'll be treated with basic human dignity and professional courtesy. He turned to face the camera directly, his composure finally returning. To anyone watching who actually wants to form an informed opinion about my film, I encourage you to see it for yourself and draw your own conclusions. Don't let anyone else, whether they're a critic, a talk show host, or even me, tell you what to think about art. Engage with it directly, think critically about it, and form your own opinions based on your own experience. With that, Robert Pattinson walked off the view stage, leaving behind a stunned studio, a humiliated host, and what would become one of the most talked-about television moments of the year. The cameras kept rolling as Joy sat in silence, the other co-hosts exchanged horrified glances, and the audience tried to process what they had just witnessed. If this story blew your mind, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments below which moment from this confrontation hit the hardest for you.